everyone! My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be talking about something that I predicted would be in the back of my head after one of our more recent conversations. And that would be ideas around masculinity, submission, stereotypes, and everything sort of related to that. And I know that every once in a while I'll get a comment that my videos are focused more on the female submissive experience, and I can't lie and say they're not. Of course, I am a female submissive. My own perspective is going to color what I talk about, but I hope that you all will enjoy this opportunity to just focus on the experience of people that are men and submissive. However, I am going to be focusing in on what it's like to be a cis straight male submissive, because I think there are complexities and differences when you are maybe a trans man, or you're a gay man, or both, or some combination of that, and you're also submissive, that maybe I just don't have a full understanding of, and so I don't want to pretend that I understand what that's like without having that knowledge. So if you are somebody that identifies with that, or has a partner like that, or a relationship that involves those sorts of dynamics to it, I would love to know what your experience is down below and your thoughts. This is definitely not like, I mean, it's kind of educational. It's more of a conversation. I want to know what you all think, if you agree, disagree. I know I'm going to be kind of like ladysplaining in this video a little bit, but I do want to have space for conversations like this because I know they're not happening elsewhere. So firstly, because we are talking about men and masculinity, I think we first have to consider, what does it mean to be a man in our society? What are the traits and behaviors associated with masculinity? And I will spare you all a full gender studies 101 lecture here and just give you some of the highlights. But typically, when we think of the traits that are associated with masculinity, we might think of things like strong, driven, ambitious, focused, in control, powerful, logical, active, or authoritative. On the more negative side, we might think of things like controlling, or violent, or impulsive. Those abstract traits then coalesce into some picture of an ideal man, and a quick Google search will bring up endless pictures of Don Draper, the stereotype of an attractive, successful family man that somehow manages to have it all. However, if you've actually watched Mad Men, especially if you have watched all of it, you know that Don Draper is very much a facade and a cardboard cutout himself, at least the persona he has as Don Draper, and that is going to be a subject for maybe a more movie and literary focused sort of channel, and I hope somebody out there has covered it. But suffice to say, there are a lot of stereotypes, and when it comes to the ideal man, we usually think of this sort of aggressive, successful businessman that also like protects and takes care of his family. If that wasn't on my list, being protective and being a provider are definitely two other very stereotypical traits associated with masculinity. But in general, we get the image of a person that is in control, that is self-assured, that has money and success, and is just aggressive enough to get exactly what they want, and they know enough to know exactly what they want as well. And of course, it goes without saying that in these images, in these stereotypes, there is never an excess of emotion. There is never any sort of crying, and feeling and having deep emotions are not part of this particular set of stereotypes, at least typically. and they're never hurt. They are always this sheer wall of total confidence. Now compare that to the stereotype of a male submissive. I have certainly given plenty of those in jest on this channel. But what do most people think of? They probably imagine someone either younger and frail or maybe older and portly, usually not very attractive, like wearing a gimp suit. And why is it always gimp suits? Like, I've only ever seen a gimp suit like once in real life with someone wearing it, and for some reason, whenever we have conversations about the kink in public, it always goes back to dudes in gimp suits. And just, sorry, that's like, we're gonna have that conversation later, but back to the stereotypes. You might have pictured someone maybe in a maid costume, if modern trends are anything to go by, or maybe a sissy or an adult baby. But regardless of how they are physically presented, they tend to have a lot of similar personality characteristics. Maybe they're sort of fragile, they're sniveling, they live for other people's attention, they're nervous, they don't have a lot of self-confidence, they tend to be very self-degrading. You might consider them to be helpless. They are sometimes even actively groveling for even just a spare moment of attention for someone else. They might even also be considered to be occasionally literally impotent. But when all of that comes together, it really forms this picture of someone that isn't able to survive without the approval or direction of someone else. And when you compare this stereotype to the stereotype of masculinity, you see how opposite they are. Instead of being self-confident and self-assured, they need the approval of others. Instead of being the one to give orders, they are the one to receive orders. Instead of being strong and powerful, they are weak and powerless. Now, I am going to note that many of these stereotypes and traits are associated with the negative aspects of stereotypical femininity, which is a whole other can of worms we're not going to have time to get into, but we are going to put just a little pin in it and remember it for a little bit later on. And so I'd like to make the thesis statement that this is really what it's all about. When people imagine the stereotype of a male submissive, they can't necessarily see masculinity and submission working together. People see power exchange, a man giving up authority to someone else, and believe that kind of literally emasculates him. That when you give up your control, when you give up your own power to someone else, you are no longer a real man. And because of that, you have to almost transmute into something else. You are no longer a man, you are a baby, you are a piece of furniture, you are a maid. It's not, I think, always seen merely as role play, as a man temporarily acting like a maid, but a man that has become a maid instead. And I realize this is kind of like psychoanalyzing, and I don't necessarily think that people literally believe this, that a man like loses all of his gender when he becomes something like a maid or a furniture piece. It's this, again, this more like subconscious judgment of what it means about a man's social status, almost his relationship to other men when he becomes submissive. Or there's also the notion that when a man like removes his manhood by giving up his power, all that's left is the feminine, and that's bad for some reason, because being a woman is bad. And again, we're not going to get into that here today, but it is potentially a thought process that is, again, that sort of subconscious underlying idea. And at the end of the day, what this all means is that a man is sort of naturally considered to be dominant. And so if you are not a dominant, if you are submissive, that means removing yourself from masculinity to some degree. But does that actually line up with the reality of being a male submissive? Are all men on the right side of the slash just worthless gimp suit wearing worms that have given up their man card? Well, of course, the short answer is no, because stereotypes can never actually capture the complexities of reality. But I do think it is interesting to explore maybe how these stereotypes intersect with the actual motivations and the reasons behind why some men are drawn to be submissive. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. Of course, whenever we talk about submission, there are a lot of general reasons why people enjoy being submissive. Some of the common ones would be an escape from everyday life, to be able to have catharsis through using pain as a way to get pleasure. It could be having a way to have a very deep bonded relationship with a partner where you trust each other and you know all of each other's secrets. It can be a way to express sort of different aspects of yourself that you don't always get to have out there in real life all the time, or the enjoyment of ritual and structure. And besides those general motivations, just as cis women and trans people maybe have their own sort of unique motivations for being drawn to BDSM, I think cis men also have their own unique motivations as well. And before we go any farther, I do want to note that I can't really make this video without addressing the fact that as a group in general, more male submissives are motivated primarily by sex compared to other groups of BDSM people. And there are also a lot of male submissives that almost use the term as a catch-all for many different labels, even if they would be more accurately described as being a bottom or being a fetishist. And there are many reasons for that, such as the fact that the act of pegging is not really widely considered to be an acceptable sex act in many heterosexual relationships, or the fact that if you are a fetishist, it is typically easier to find people that are willing to indulge those fetishes from within the BDSM community as opposed to random otherwise vanilla partners. So I understand why there may be such a large number potentially of male submissives that maybe aren't necessarily submissive but are really in it for the sex, which is fine, but then also confusing when you're trying to talk about power exchange, and then that's not necessarily the draw. But sexual reasons notwithstanding, there are a lot of motivations out there for why a man might be drawn towards submission. Maybe it's that they care more about their partner's pleasure over their own. Maybe it's that they want a safe place to be able to feel small. Maybe it's that they want somewhere where they can cry and express intense emotion. And if you were paying attention earlier, you might already be connecting the dots and going, okay, well, this is certainly not going with the stereotype of masculinity. Having feelings, crying, being small, that's not allowed. And you know, I don't want to paint submissive men with a broad brush, you know, hashtag not all men. I definitely understand there is a lot of complexity and nuance, which is why I do want to hear from you all down in the comment section below on this one especially. But I do want to point out that there can, at least at some level, be a motivation to use BDSM as a way to be able to express things that aren't like socially acceptable because of those stereotypes around masculinity. It's not always about some outright wanting to escape the patriarchy, but I do think that when we look at escaping from everyday life pressures, which is like one of the number one things that a lot of people cite when they want to be submissive, regardless of gender, I think for men, part of that escape is like, oh gosh, I don't have to be like this big manly man all the time, and if I don't do that, I'm a failure. Like, I have more freedom here maybe to explore outside what is considered appropriate for my gender and social role. Because how many men out there felt locked up, felt separate from their emotions before they discovered BDSM, and they couldn't even cry? How many men felt like the only safe place they had to be able to cry was in doing scenes, was in being part of the community? I definitely know more than one, and I'm glad that space is there, but it's also kind of sad that kink is one of the only places that's out there where they do have that safe space. And beyond just emotions and expressing feelings, the kink scene also becomes this place for alternative expression at large. You can play around with wearing feminine clothing and colors. You can wear skirts. You can try some gender fuckery. You can have a role play scene where you try on your mother's lipstick and are encouraged and praised for doing so, even though years ago, maybe when that did really happen to you, it wasn't okay and you were shamed or even punished for doing that. Or maybe it just means trying on a pair of high heels because society always told you you shouldn't. And I'm gonna let you all in on a big secret here. This is a big secret. It turns out wearing different articles of clothing and colors that are anything other than gray, green, blue, and black don't make you not a man. It just means that you have more access to different ways to express yourself. It doesn't make you not a man to try on makeup or to wear heels. And I think if anything, the kink community and kink spaces are one of the very few areas, very few places we have where the definition of what it means to be masculine is so much broader and allows so many different opportunities to play around with what exactly that looks like. And before we move on to the last part of the video here, there is one subject that I want to touch on that I wasn't really able to fit in anywhere else, and that would be going back and addressing the stereotypes of male submissives being nervous and lacking confidence and needing approval from others. There was actually a study that was done in 2013 that somewhat looks at this issue. According to the research, compared to both non-BDSM participants and to other people in the lifestyle, submissive men are the least confident in their relationships and also have the strongest need for approval from others. And while it might be easy to look at that and say, hey, you know, that proves the stereotype. Submissive men are submissive men because they are nervous in their relationships and don't have confidence. I would argue instead what that shows is society could be less accepting of submissive men and the relationships they want to have versus any other type of BDSM people. It is much more acceptable to be a female submissive with a dominant male partner than a male submissive with a female dominant partner. Society just is largely not very accepting of that, and I think that lack of acceptance could be part of what is contributing to that lack of confidence and that nervousness in their relationships. And so that sense of insecurity maybe is not only something that is purely internal, but also is coming from external expectations. However, I don't really have a good explanation for why submissive men are more likely to need approval from others, other than pointing out that if you are someone that likes making other people happy, you are more likely to be submissive maybe than compared to the rest of the population, and that makes sense to me. It maybe isn't even really a gendered thing, it just happens to be a little bit significant in this particular study. And by the way, if you all would like me to go through this study and like explain it more and break it down more, it is really interesting and has been very influential for future research, and there were so many articles written about it. And if you guys would like me to talk about it in more detail, please let me know down below. I haven't really done a video like that before, but I think it is fun to look at some of the few pieces of detailed research on members of the BDSM community that we do have. But let's get back to the subject at hand. I have spent a lot of time here mulling over how submission for men sometimes looks like fighting against stereotypes of masculinity and trying to free yourself from them. But that doesn't necessarily have to always be the case. If you are a submissive man, you don't always have to do the opposite of what the masculine ideal is. Just because you are submissive and a man doesn't mean you can't, like, drinking beer or watching football or working out, and you can still be aggressive in the boardroom, even if not in the bedroom. The beautiful thing about submission is that it never has to look just one way. Yes, you might be a slave worm dick number ZA-134297050 or whatever your barcode is, but you can also be a well-trained security guard or a 1950s house husband. So let's start with that one actually, because it's kind of my favorite, and I know I haven't made a 101 video yet on 1950s relationships and role-playing that style, but trust me, that video is on the way. But typically, just as a very, very quick rundown, the stereotype again is that the head of household is the dominant man and the wife is the submissive woman in the relationship, and it is very much kind of replicating those gender roles from that period of time. But what if I told you you could be daddy without being capital D daddy? Oh yes, it's very possible, my friends. You can completely play those stereotypes on their head, because at the end of the day, no matter what label you pick or roleplay style, everything is always about motivation and intention. So if you want to have a 1950s relationship where you are a stay-at-home house husband and your wife works for NASA, or you are still the breadwinner and you are still the provider, but instead what you're doing is your wife has complete control over the domain of the household, and she sets the budget, and she's the one that gives you fun money, and you do all of the caretaking around the house and everything else. Taking out the garbage or doing the grilling can be a masculine dominant thing to do. It can also be a submissive and service-oriented thing to do if you go into it with that mindset. And I think the easiest way to sort of go along with traditional masculine expectations but maintaining that position as a submissive is to really tap into that provider and masculine caretaker role, being the one that is the breadwinner for the family and bringing home the money, but then allowing your partner or your wife or whoever to be the one that dictates how that money is spent. Or being the one who provides them with fun money to get their nails done or go shopping with their friends, or doing things like opening the door for them or driving them around. Again, it can be dominant, but it can also be very service-oriented and submissive. And outside of this 1950s example, you can also apply this with other dynamics, like being a butler or a personal advisor or a bodyguard or a Secret Service agent or the quiet, strong knight. No matter what relationship style you pick or what speaks to you, there are always ways to riff on it to make it work for what you and your partner want to get out of it, especially if maybe being a baby sissy maid isn't really part of what you want. And I would even say that knowing what your desires are in a relationship and not being afraid to pursue them and ask for them is actually pretty masculine. And I'm not alone on this one. There are other dominant women that think the same thing as well. I came across this article which had this very reassuring quote in it, which said, "When I finally had a male submissive in my life, I was so impressed," dominatrix and sex educator Hutsi Han told Goldwert. "These guys are so much stronger and braver than your average, middle-of-the-road, straight, het, dominant guy because they're actually letting loose and letting go. To me, that is so much more masculine and stronger." And yeah, I guess it is cheesy to say that there is strength in submission, but sometimes it's actually true. And I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about here today. I really want to emphasize that this is not some kind of authoritative educational video and that I'm trying to tell you what to think about something. I am simply expressing what I have observed and what my limited experience has been, and if that is the same for you or different or what your thoughts are in general, I would love to know what you all are thinking down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this, if you have not already, please do subscribe because I make videos twice a week about all sorts of BDSM and kink related topics. And finally, if you really enjoyed this, if you want to support what I do, the best way that you can do that is through Patreon. A link to that will be down below. That is what makes everything on my channel possible. If you do already support me over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.